Good. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So our next speaker is Mark Lokanan from Royal Roads University, who is a financial crime expert who employs machine learning and artificial intelligence techniques to help detect and prevent fraud and money laundering. More specifically, he uses computational techniques to address securities fraud, detect fraud in supply chains and organizations, and anti-money laundering compliance and regulation. He's the founder of Vedia Cloud Analytics, an IT analytics firm that integrates computational intelligence and cloud computing to create value for companies. He uses data mining, predictive modeling, and statistical analysis to uncover hidden patterns and relationships. As a result, he's helped organizations improve their ability to detect and prevent financial crimes. In addition to his work in the private sector, he has conducted evidence-based research on financial crime issues for government agencies. And today he's going to be speaking to us about using machine learning and AI to automate anti-money laundering efforts. Thanks. Mark, whenever you're ready.
Sure. Thank you, David. I just want to say I'm very honored and privileged to be presenting to you from the unceded territory of the Katzie and Kwantlen people. Would you be handling the slide, Shane?
We can see your title slide right now.
Yeah, but
so are you going to be advancing them, Shane? Is that the idea?
No, I thought the slides were his and that you would be.
Because I can't move the slides. It's.
Okay.
So Mark, right.
Okay.
there.
Okay. I think I got it here.
Oh, okay. You got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. So today, basically, I'll talk about how we use machine learning and AI in the financial, both in the financial and non-banking financial sector. I'll focus first on the current deterministic rule-based approach that we have that's being used in the system, financial system. Then I'll talk about how we can engage more accurately machine learning and AI within both the financial sector and non-financial sector, followed by some case studies that we are currently working on. So in brief, what's money laundering? And this is a very, very generalized definition of what it is. Basically, you have launderers who try to disguise the proceeds of crime and then convert it into legitimate business. As you all know, in Canada, real estate, gambling, luxury car investments are some of the biggest sectors in which launderers are able to launder money in the province and Canada in the whole. So what's the problem here? Well, it's difficult. See, it's very difficult for law enforcement to detect these kind of crimes because, first of all, there's no physical evidence of these transactions, and second, it's anonymous. So it's extremely difficult for them to detect who is behind these activities. And this is where I personally think, based on my experience working with these institutions, that AI and machine learning can seriously advance the fraud detection technique in this area. Before I proceed with this presentation, there is something that I really want to flush out early on here. So in Canada, AML is an enterprise. It's an enterprise that comprises of AML regulation that is predominantly based on a deterministic rule-based approach to regulate the system, the financial and non-financial system. And then you have, on the other side, AML compliance, whose job is basically to reduce the false positives in the data. So it's important to understand, for us to make any progress, we need to kind of situate ourselves within this dichotomy of AML regulation and AML compliance. So what exactly is this rule-based approach? It's mostly a deterministic approach to detect financial illicit transactions within the system. So a lot of institutions like this approach because it's clear, it's well defined, it's you can identify these suspicious transactions, and then you can report them to FinTrack, right? So basically how it works, again, most institutions will tailor this to their own system. So what you have is some kind of a mathematical formula. For example, you may want to flag transactions that are over 20,000 in about 10 days or so, or you may have, this one is very popular, you may have institutions, banks, for example, flagging transactions that are over 5,000. But as you will soon see, this is very easy for launderers to circumvent. They're very, very innovative rules that they use, innovative techniques that they use to get around these kind of deterministic rule-based approach to detect fraudulent transactions or money laundering transactions. The advantages, as I said, is government agencies like this, right? Financial institutions also like it because you can file your suspicious transactions in the form of these STRs, citing the reasons why you flag these transactions, why you think they're suspicious, and send it off to FinTrack. Now, the big issue there is, as you guys probably have read from the Collins Commission report, is that FinTrack has so many of these data points that they physically cannot go through each and every one of them within their system. To go further, what we have is a lot of these institutions, again, there's probably variations here and there, tailor their rules to specific risks within that institution. But predominantly, what I've found is that these rules are focused mostly in three main areas. One is the volume of the transactions, right? You want to detect as many as possible, keeping the false positives in mind. The structure of the account, that's coming up frequently these days, the different types of account. And I don't know if you have time to talk about the facilitation of these accounts in Canada, or the professions that facilitate these accounts in Canada. And then the speed of these transactions, right? The fluidity of the financial system makes it so easy for transactions to move from country A to country B. Most of these transactions, most of these methods, these rule-based methods, are tailored to detect anomalies in the data. And this, for me, as you will see later on, is somewhat problematic, at least where I am concerned regarding money laundering transactions in the province and in Canada. So, as I said, a lot of institutions have high transaction volumes. And so basically you use sophisticated dashboards or unsupervised learning to detect patterns and transactions within the data. Of course, that data must fall, or that transactions must fall outside of the scope of the institutional threshold. And these institutions basically use the threshold method to customize their parameters, to detect, as I said, the kind of suspicious activities that they want to. And again, there's a lot of professional judgment here, because we need to understand how much resources would you place on detecting 5,000 a transaction over $5,000 to $8,000 a day. So you got to, this is very resource intensive, and you got to know, you got to pick and choose which ones you can actually go after. Because one thing that I've kind of observed over the years is that we can't stop money laundering in Canada, but we can mitigate money laundering, again, across the country in different domains. So what are some of the problems with this rule-based approach? The first thing is that it leads to significant amount of false positive in the data. And if you talk to some banking officials or other compliance officials within these institutions, they'll tell you approximately between 20 to 30 of these false positives per day. And that's a lot. That's a lot to filter through. It's very, very resource intensive. That is, think of it this way. If you block one of your top clients, think about the amount of resources that you have to spend to unblock that account. Secondly, from a compliance officer's perspective, think about the dilemma you have. You're unblocking one of your perhaps biggest client, right? And then, you probably have to talk to one of your bosses or whatnot about as to why you blocked this account. There's a potential loss to this account, and the account could probably be a significant account for your organizations. Again, from an organization perspective, think about the fines. If you fail to block this account and the account eventually, turn out to be a significant account in comparison to their account where money laundering is concerned, then yes, you probably have to pay some serious fines to the regulators. The other problem that I've noticed with the rule-based approach is that it's based on some kind of threshold. And the thing about launderers is that they're so quick to adopt to these threshold, right? Like, I mean, if you look at most of the institutions in Canada, actually the financial system in itself is rule-based. So these rules can easily be learned by launderers. And it's not difficult for them to circumvent whatever controls is in place, especially when these controls are based on unsupervised, most unsupervised learning technology. So they're very, very difficult to detect. And the other thing with the rule-based approach is that, personally, again, I find there's low coverage. And if you want to detect more transactions as the launderers adopt to these different rules, then you have to implement more rules. So we have a bunch of rules coming in every month, every quarter, which makes the system very, very, very overloaded. And to the extent that it becomes difficult to actually give credence to most of these transactions. Now, this is where money laundering and machine learning and AI comes in. And industry will tell you that there's a problem here, as you will soon see. The message I want to get across here today is that we are not saying, hey, we're going to come in there and take over and get rid of the rule-based system. No, that's not what the idea is. The idea is that we will work with the rule-based system to reduce the number of false positive alerts in the data. Remember, we are not really trying to detect money laundering, because at this point in time, you're not detecting money laundering, you're detecting suspicious transactions. So that distinctions need to be made clear very, very early. There is still need for human intelligence here. So for those who are, acquainted with machine learning, basically we're using the data to look at the past in order to tell us what has happened, and that's what's happening right now. So you have different vendors and dashboard using mostly unsupervised learning to detect what has happened, but machine learning can take this further and to tell you why this has happened. Predictive analytics can tell you why this has happened. So this is why, again, domain knowledge is very important. I sometimes get the question, and this is perfectly natural, right? I mean, am I going to lose my job through machine learning and AI? Well, again, I mean, from my look of it is that objective science is not always aligned with intuition. So you do need domain knowledge. Machine learning, keep in mind, can only flag a transactions as suspicious. You still need people, which is very, very important, to use domain knowledge to understand and investigate these transactions. The other thing to keep in mind here is how it works is you use historical data. So data that's already in the financial system, data that the entity already has to detect suspicious transactions. Again, it's not money laundering or suspicious transaction that you might consider based on domain knowledge, that is money laundering. Again, you still have to use the rule-based approach. So you're basically learning from both normal transactions and money laundering transactions to predict the risk of known cases within the system. There are two types that are mostly used: supervised and unsupervised. And potentially there could be some disagreement here. So based on my experience, again, what I have seen is that most institutions have a system of unsupervised learning, right? This is where they try to identify the natural groupings within the data. So you want to see how the data is ordered. For example, I'll give you an example, basically using data from North America to capture nodes or networks between Canada, United States, and Mexico. Supervised learning is very intelligent in clustering the data. What I find missing here, however, is that you still need to identify the huge anomalies within the data. And this is where supervised learning comes into play, because you're trying to categorize the data, right, based on either a predictive model or a regression model. So as I noted, we got to be very careful here, because the transactions that you detect through supervised learning is not really money laundering transaction at this point. It's suspicious transaction. So we need to be very, very cautious how we proceed when we start labeling transaction as money laundering transaction. Rather, at that point, it should be labeled as suspicious transactions, because that's what you're reporting to FINTRAC. There are two types of analysis you can do here, and the one that is predominantly used is classification, right? So you can take the same data and you can classify it. That is, the normal transaction would be legitimate transaction, and the one that you flag as suspicious could be classified as non-legitimate transactions. We're also doing projects based on Basel AML data, where we're trying to predict the features that will detect countries who are sanctions versus the countries who are not being sanctioned. And then more predictive analytics, where we use regression methods to predict the number of suspicious reports that will be submitted from different regulatory agencies and financial institutions. So what are some of the challenges of this approach? Well, in order for machine learning and AI to work, you need complete high quality data. This is, again, in my opinion, the biggest problem facing the industry. You see, financial institutions does not really collect all the data on a particular client. Like, you don't have the demographic profile per se of a particular client. So the data really suffer from what we call the 360 degrees views, because it's not really complete. The issue here, however, is not so much the data quality to say, but how can we overcome bad data quality? Data, as you all know, is very, very unstructured. So these projects, you know, I don't know of a better way to put it, but the popular truism of garbage in, garbage out comes into play here. If you don't model the algorithm correctly, you probably will find or get very, very inconsistent and unreliable results. So the burden, if you're serious about this, the burden is on the institution to provide the kind of data that will allow the algorithm and the data analysts to have a more complete 360 view of the customers. The other thing that is very important to understand here is that financial institutions do not share their data. It's very difficult to understand or profile an individual within the network. What financial institutions will do is to give you or work with you on individual data set to provide some sort of predictive, or provide and deploy some sort of predictive model to their team. As I said before, I don't think, and this is not going to happen, AI and machine learning cannot get rid of domain knowledge. You still need, the most important thing for me at least, is that you still need expertise in this area. And I find what happened is that if you observe a machine learning expert, data scientist, and a domain expert speak, it's like these individuals are speaking two different languages. one cannot understand the other. And so we need to be very, very careful of how we align. We need to be very more cognizant of how we align these two areas. Now, the question that normally comes up when I give these talks to institutions and conferences and so on is that do you want an AML expert, somebody, for example, who's ACAMS qualified, to go learn how to do coding in Python? Because that's not their objective. So the idea is, how do we get, the big question for me is, how do we get these two teams, individual AML compliance, to work with the data scientists, you know, in a more cohesive fashion? And this brings me to the other question, where there's a big trust factor that I've noticed in industry right now, because even a single case, even a single false positive can undermine trust for AI professional, right? So it's absolutely very, very important to build trust in the industry. And I think, you know, this is where I would say, for all the advocates of machine learning and AI, this is where we are lacking. I think we're taking away the human element. We're trying to say, hey, that you don't need the human element anymore. You don't need the domain knowledge. AI and machine learning can do everything. That's not the case. You need buy-ins. You need buy-ins, and you need to work not only with AML compliance, because you need to work, as you can see in the final point there, you need to work with AML regulation as well, because that, at the end of the day, and again, I've had experience with this, we could potentially see the same problem that happens in the securities industry in Canada, right? Where regulatory technology was capturing certain kinds of offenses, and then you have all these gray area offenses escaping regulatory technology simply because regulators were not working together with compliance and the AI experts. So we need to be very, very careful here. The point being that there's a lot of fundings involved in these expertise infrastructure. And for those things to happen, you do need regulatory appetite. We do need the provincial government and the federal government to get on board with these projects. This is an issue, again, that I've seen come up a lot in discussions. So you have companies or institutions that are very conservative in their approach, and then you have some institutions that are very aggressive, very aggressive. So the conservative one, they want to flag fewer transactions, but as you can see here, this means, you know, you want to err on the side of fairness, right? Or you will capture very few false positives in the data, but your recall, that is, you may miss some of the fraud. And again, this is all based on, you know, the institution risk appetite, as to how risky they want to go here. Or you can be ultra aggressive, that you will flag more transactions, and in this case you may have many false positives, but your recall, you'll catch a lot of the, you know, fraudulent or money laundering transactions. I can't tell you which one an institution should, you know, it should be more inclined to look at, but I surely have observed over the years that depending on the culture of these institutions, some of them can be more aggressive and some can be ultra conservative in their approach. I want to discuss in brief 3 use cases that we're currently working on here. And one of the problems in not just money laundering, but in fraud, for example, using machine learning to detect fraud, is that models, whether it's credit card fraud, loan fraud, securities fraud, these models rarely get deployed. Somewhere along the line, you build the model, and you know, so many things get in the way, compliance get in the way, regulation get in the way, and you know, the model probably reach a dead end without being employed. So deployment is one of the biggest obstacle, I would say, facing machine learning and AI experts who build their model and are seeking different avenues or to work with potential institution to deploy that model. in terms of AML classification, you can build model to predict money laundering transactions, and most of these would be binary classification model, right? So the ones that we're working on right now could be trying to identify legitimate transactions in banks. So the bank will use normal data versus data they classify as suspicious, and you label or code them as 1 for yes and no for 0. And the same thing with mobile money payments. But the largest factors there is what exactly these institutions want, what exactly these agencies want. And again, their features, or what you call in the statistics class, their independent variables, are all different. I just give you a few here, so you can get an idea of the kind of variables that they're looking at. So some of them are looking at the types of transactions. So you want to know the amount of money transferred in, the amount of money transferred out, who's really involved, right? Is top management involved? Employees involved? But the most important variable, I think the one constant across all the institutions or the data sets, is this: date. Some institutions want general date stamp data, so year, day, time. Some want very granular data, right? Not just time, but minutes and seconds. Yeah, and you can understand why. They probably want to know which day of the week, for example, launderers are most active. Hours of the day, launderers are most active, right? So I can understand why. But the one constant across most financial institutions is and some non-financial institutions, is the date timestamp data. Types of money laundering, the placement stage is, and again, this is debatable, but from my experience, I would say the placement stage is the most important stage in the process. If you don't detect it there, it's very, very difficult to detect it in the layering and integration stage, especially when you are, when you're dealing with a regulatory system that is very, very fragmented. Each provinces have their own rules, own unique rules governing different industries. Money could be placed easily after the placement stage, or integrated easily in real estate, luxury cars, the casino, with minimum effort in certain provinces. The amount is also one of the key data points that agencies look at. The balance and demographic variables. As I said, this one is very tricky because a lot of agencies don't really collect data on, due to sensitivity, of course, there are different political issues here, but a lot of agencies don't collect 360 views data on individual demographics. And then, some companies, some agencies wants you to look at continuous variables, right? So you're basically looking at a continuous amount. So here is an example of Canadian borders, Canadian CBSA, I think, that has data on Caesar value at Canadian borders. And then basically we can use this data to predict illicit or undeclared funds coming in or going out, transferred out of the borders. And some of the predictors here that we have is, again, timestamp data is very important. Regions, port of entries, penalties. But I think the biggest one that is important for government agencies like this is the level of offense, right? There are 4 types. There are 4 levels of offense: level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4. So level 1 and level 2, you probably forgot the stash, and you put it in your suitcase, or you're coming from a country, you don't trust the banking system, and you have your money hidden in some compartment in there. There are lots of reasons why you may want to, put away your 10,000 or whatever it is. But level 3 and level 4 offenses are the key predictors here that for me, that's coming out from this data, because these are the ones that indicate that there's illicit or undeclared funds hidden in some compartment. So we want to really detect the amount of funds that are being hidden, intentionally being hidden in the various compartments. Now, in conclusion, I think, and again, I don't have hard evidence about this, but there's a lot of guesses and estimation as to how machine learning and AI should be used in the industry. What I have seen right now at the moment is a lot of high-level data management, that is more focused on advanced analytics, right, that coalesce with the rule-based methods to detect money laundering transactions. And these systems are designed, for transaction, mostly for transaction monitoring, screening alert, and customer monitoring as well. I don't think, this is just perhaps, this is a part of AI. We can label it under unsupervised learning, detecting patterns, links, and trends in the data. But I don't think that institutions are yet using ML and AI to its fullest potential. Moving forward, from my perspective, again, people can differ certainly on this issue. I think the biggest factor facing the application and the adoption of AI in the industry is trust. Regulators and AML compliance have a very, very difficult time trusting AI and machine learning, especially, as I've said before, one false positive can derail your entire effort, right? You need buy-in. We need, in the AI community, we need buy-ins. We need to show, first of all, we need the culture of AI needs to adopt. But more importantly, you need to start transferring knowledge, right? So, for example, you can't really think about it this way. You go in there and you're educating compliance officer on how to use a random forest algorithm. From the time you put the mathematical formula on screen, you will lose 90% of them, right? So there needs to be more cohesiveness. AI should not be something that is, intimidated. It should not be seen as something that's going to take over their jobs or whatnot. You need to work together. And then finally, the conflict between AML compliance and AML regulations, that there needs to be some traction there as well. If you look at some of the most recent reports that has come out here in BC and mostly in BC, is that they're mostly based on an analysis of rule-based regulation, right? And recommendations are also based on rule-based regulation. I've only seen one, commission study, and that's in the securities industry, that's talked about the application of computational technology to detect securities fraud in that industry. So I think there needs to be more alignment within these two industries, for them to decide how exactly they want AI and machine learning to be used in an ethical way in the industry, for sure. That's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions at this point, I'm more than willing to answer these.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Do we have questions for the speaker? Yes, Nima. Here, I'm going to just walk